Again, I would suggest to the supporters of the resolution that the President's key advisers, including the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Pace, and the new commander in Iraq, General Petraeus, strongly support this increase in troops. With that, I yield such time as he may consume to the distinguished gentleman from Washington State, Sheriff Reichert. Mr. Reichert.
I thank the gentleman from New York.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman from New York for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I support our troops wholeheartedly and without reservation, but I cannot support a resolution that simply opposes a new strategy without offering any alternative plan to win. There's too much at stake. Let's just think about where we are today as a country, about the global war we're in. People with intent to kill Americans and how that affects our strategy in Iraq. When considering this, we must consider our nation's history and other difficult times of war. There have been many bleak moments in America's history, battles we have been engaged in where American victory was far from certain. In 1942, hell-bent on dominating the world with his ideology, Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich systematically marched through Europe and taking the most basic freedoms from the Jewish people and killing millions. The United States entered World War II reluctantly, and we were not ready for the hurdles that we faced. Don't forget, there were times when victory was far from certain. The outlook was grim. Many Americans and Europeans alive today can remember how bleak those times were as the war drug on and on and on. But we didn't give up. We persevered because we knew there was too much at stake. 80 years before World War II, in 1862, President Lincoln faced a war that most believed could not be won. He faced vocal and unrelenting criticism for his resolve to win the Civil War. When the war began, Lincoln called for 74,000 troops for 90 days. 74,000 troops for 90 days. And history has showed us that Lincoln greatly underestimated the resources needed because, as we know, over 620,000 soldiers were killed during that war. At a time in our history when it might have been politically expedient to end the Civil War without first achieving victory, President Lincoln pressed on, constantly seeking a new strategy until he found one that worked because so much was at stake. Perhaps some of the resolve Lincoln displayed came from lessons he learned 15 years earlier when he entered a smaller battle. In 1848, Abraham Lincoln was an often criticized young freshman member of this body, the House of Representatives, and was facing a difficult point in his career. Lincoln criticized the reasons President Polk gave for getting us into the Mexican-American War, a war that began before Lincoln came to office, a position that I can identify with today as I stand here. Then Congressman Lincoln voted for a resolution that stated the Mexican-American War was unnecessarily and unconstitutionally initiated by President Polk. Lincoln thought the war was nothing more than a political move to grab land from the Mexican people. My friends, it is legitimate and, in fact, our duty to question the reasons why our country goes to war, and Abraham Lincoln showed us that. However, he also showed us something else. Abraham Lincoln made an incredibly important distinction that we can learn from today. A Lincoln biographer, Doris Kearns Goodwin, writes that after being criticized for that vote, Lincoln sought to clarify his position, arguing that although he had challenged the instigation of the war, he had never voted against supplies for the soldiers. This is an important point to make again. Lincoln sought to clarify his position, arguing that although he had challenged the instigation of the war, he had never voted against supplies for the soldiers. Lincoln knew the damage of condemning a war while claiming to support the troops. Yet that's what this resolution before us does today. And during the American Revolution, the men and women who would become this country's first citizens were declared by the King of England to be in rebellion. The King sent soldiers across the Atlantic to quell the uprising. In every war, it's the average citizen who stands up and fights for his neighbor's freedom. It is the same today. In response to the King of England's attack, again, it was the average citizen who raised his hand, volunteered, stood up, and fought for our freedom. A bookstore owner, the manager of an iron foundry, and a land surveyor all stood and fought for our freedom. Those men were Henry Knox, Nathaniel Greene, and George Washington. During America's war for independence, it was